Commission for July 8th. For join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Ms. Oppen, if you'll do the TV coverage announcement and the roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Planning Commission hearings are televised live on County Santa Barbara Television, CSB-TV, Channel 20, at 9 o'clock a.m. in the South Coast, Lompoc, San Ynez Valley, Santa Maria, and Orchid areas. Rebroadcast of Planning Commission hearings are on Fridays at 5 o'clock p.m. on CSB-TV, Channel 20. And for the roll call, Commissioner Cooney?
Here.
Commissioner Brown?
Here.
Commissioner Brooks?
Here.
Commissioner Valencia?
Here.
Commissioner Blau?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Black, if you'll do the agenda status report or the projection report.
Yes. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. This morning we have 4 items on the agenda, and 3 of those items are ready to move forward. Item number 2, we're requesting the Commission continue until August 12th. I know it's unusual to continue a South County item to a North County hearing date, and we're suggesting it for 2 reasons. First of all, our next available South County hearing is on August 5th, and that day is devoted entirely to the Botanic Garden. We just didn't feel like we could put anything else on that day, and we were not certain we were going to be having a hearing on the 19th given the projection report. So if we do end up having items on the 19th, we will simply move this to the 19th and let all the parties who are interested in this item know. But so this is a bit of a holding pattern
Okay.
for your commission. But everything else is ready to move forward this today. With respect to the projection report, your next hearing will be next week, July 15th. That hearing will be conducted in Santa Maria. We have an appeal of the Lompoc Wind Energy Met Towers, and then we also have an initiation request for a general plan amendment on the school site, on Key Site 17 in the Orchid area. And then we'll be hopefully concluding our work on the Santa Ynez Community Plan. I have set the agenda so that we'll take the 2 permit items first in the morning, and then we'll assume that we'll start with the Santa Ynez Community Plan at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. We should have enough time to conclude that. As I mentioned before, the Commission's next agenda date is on August 5th, and that's devoted to your first hearing on the Botanic Garden item. Then we'll be having a hearing back in Santa Maria again on August 12th, and that has 2 items on at the moment. I have requested that planners start to get agenda items on your projection report for August and even into September, so we have a better idea of what your hearing needs will be in those months. So hopefully next week I'll be able to report to you on that.
Great. Thank you. Commissioner Cooney has a question.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Black, with regard to the Botanic Garden hearing, I know there's been some doubt about whether the garden was ready to move forward due to involvement of the Jesucita fire and other issues. Are you relatively comfortable at this point that that's a hard and fast date the public can rely on?
Yes, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Cooney, we actually continued the Botanic Garden for about a month due to the Jesucita fire and some needs that we had in revising and acknowledging the fire in their environmental document. But we believe August 5th is a firm date.
And the notice of that meeting would be circulated to all those people who've expressed interest in this matter?
Yes. Yes, and I think most people are aware that that's our target date at this point.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is the point in time where we allow time for public comment for anything that's not on today's agenda. And I don't see any slips. And I
No
don't see anyone
speaker slips.
approaching. Okay, great. Thank you. In that case, we'll go to Planning Commissioner's information reports. Commissioner Brown.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Oppen, would you just put that slide up, and I can speak to it, and our audience, our viewing audience, can take down and take notes and be a little bit more aware while I speak to it. I wanted to invite the community to the day-long event that will be held this Saturday, beginning at 9 o'clock. The Goleta Valley Planning Advisory Committee, as I think many of our public know, or may not know, but certainly citizens in the eastern Goleta Valley know, have been working on an update of the Goleta Community Plan. And this is their efforts to get community input on a variety of issues. So we look forward to those people who are interested. Tell your neighbors that please come. I think you'll find it to be an interesting day, and hope to see you there on Saturday. Thank you.
Commissioner Brooks.
Yes, thank you, Chair Plow. I received what I felt a very interesting document electronically. It's called Communities Tackle Global Warming. It's a guide to California's SB 375. I have asked Ms. Opland, and she has very kindly made several copies if other commissioners would be interested in having a copy of this, members of the public or other members of the planning department. It has a very easy format to follow. It talks about the components of SB 375. It talks about sustainable communities, CEQA, and regional housing needs. Thank you.
Thank you. And do we have a divisional briefings this morning?
No, Mr. Chair, there's no divisional briefings.
Okay. We do have some minutes that we need to approve. I think there's just one for June 17th, and I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
I'll second.
Any discussion, corrections, questions? Seeing none, Ms. Opland.
Commissioner Cooney,
Abstain.
Commissioner Brown,
Aye.
Commissioner Brooks.
Aye.
Commissioner Valencia.
Aye.
Commissioner Blau.
Aye.
Vote carries 401.
Thank you. Now, a director's report.
Yes, Mr. Chair and members of the commission. First thing I'd like to announce this morning, and you've probably already heard, so I'm sure it's not brand new news for you, is that yesterday the board did appoint a new planning and development director for the department. So we are looking forward to Mr. Glenn Russell starting with us. He's going to start around September 1st. I'm not exactly sure when, and I'll be filling in until he arrives. But I have a copy of the press release in case you didn't see any of the information regarding the director. And I think Commissioner Blau
Yes.
met him.
Yes,
in
I
the
sat on
interview
the,
process.
one of the panels that did the interview on the candidates. Is one pretty dynamic, interesting gentleman. I think you're really going to enjoy working for him. He's
Good.
high energy, very bright. Yeah.
Mr. Baker's last day is today, and unfortunately, he's not here because he's up with the Coastal Commission on the Goleta Beach permeable pier project, which I'm sure your commission's aware is going through the Coastal Commission process. That project will be coming to your commission after the commission's action. And it's a bit of an unusual order of things, but we decided, given the timeline that we had, to address the temporary revetment on the beach and the fact that 90% of the project is in the Coastal Commission's jurisdiction. We requested that they take up the matter before we certified the EIR and took local action, because their action obviously is critical to the success of the project. So that will be coming back to your commission and will be on appeal to the board and the Coastal Commission once the Coastal Commission takes action on the original permit jurisdiction. So a bit of an odd situation, or a different situation, I shouldn't say odd. But you'll be seeing that project probably later on this summer or fall. Did you have a question about that?
Commissioner Cooney.
I did. Thank you, Mr. Chair. With regard to that process reversal, it's interesting because for those projects we see which are in the jurisdiction of the Coastal Commission, it seems that we could do that every single time. For example, in Naples, we could have sent it to the Coastal Commission without local action and say, how do you guys feel about it? Because we know you're ultimately going to have some say-so. So it concerns me a little bit in that the process we have always followed, and I think is legally required, is to have local approval before matters are submitted to the Coastal Commission. So tell me how to distinguish this particular case.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Cooney, this project is quite different from Naples. Naples doesn't have any original permit jurisdiction associated with the Coastal Commission. It's really just appeals jurisdiction and then the LCP amendment, which clearly needs to go through local review before it goes to the commission. The commission certifies local jurisdictions' action. They don't wholesale make changes to our local coastal program. So it's really quite different. Probably the most analogous, I didn't say that right, but you know what I mean, project I can think of is a seawall that extends into the Mead High Tide Line area and is within the jurisdiction of both the county and the local, the Coastal Commission. And typically in those projects, we retain most of the jurisdiction. We don't tend to put seawalls out in the middle of the high water area. We put them as close to land as we can, but some of a seawall is typically in the Coastal Commission's jurisdiction. In those cases, we typically have processed our local permits first, but the statute does allow for the reverse to occur. So it's something that we requested and used in the statute that I don't think we intend to use frequently, but in situations like this where it's such a significant public project with a very significant public expenditure, we felt like it was the better course of action.
In those cases, in those rare cases where the county defers to the Coastal Commission for initial decision, is there any kind of priority given to the project by the Coastal Commission? Because certainly with its staff limits, projects languish often for months.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Cooney, projects that go to the Coastal Commission for decision are bound by their own Permit Streamlining Act requirements that are specified in the Coastal Commission's regulations. So there are limitations on the timeframes for review, different than what we see on permit appeals, where once something's taken on substantial issue, then the timeframe for review is really pretty open.
And just in terms of process, the way this worked this time and the way, for example, a new pier off of Isla Vista might be handled, these decisions are made within the department. They're not reviewed in advance for processing decisions by any decision makers.
Mr. Chair, in this case, the Board of Supervisors actually decided to submit the project to the Coastal Commission in advance of our own local action. So it wasn't a decision of the department at all.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I don't know if the commission noticed this morning, but when you were looking at these overheads with the lights on, did you notice how clear they were? We got a new projector. And it works much better. And I know this is something we've talked about at our retreats and the quality of slides, so hopefully you'll find that this is much better. But we did just pretty recently purchase a screen as well. So hopefully it'll work better for you, and we're going to encourage the board to do the same thing because their projector is really old.
Commissioner Valencia has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Black, there was recently a decision by the Board of Supervisors concerning parking, and it's in the paper today, and I had a question. The question was, why did that not come for discussion and public hearings to the Planning Commission? It seems something so contentious as that should have had some discussion at this level.
So, Mr. Chair, and I'll go through the rest of the board items as well. Yesterday, the board considered on the administrative agenda parking restriction on Foothill Road. I think it was between Mission Canyon and Ty Road. Is that correct? There is the reason your commission didn't see that item, and you don't really ever see parking issues, is it's not an issue that the commission holds any jurisdiction over. We have no permits to issue for no parking outside of the coastal zone. If it were in the coastal zone, because it could affect coastal parking, it would be something you'd look at.
Okay, so parking especially on a highway of that type, we have no jurisdiction.
Right.
All right, thank you, that answered.
With respect to other items that have been at the board since the last time we met and discussed the board items, on June 23rd, the solar ordinances that your commission had considered were presented to the Board of Supervisors, and those were adopted. Santa Barbara Ranch went back to the board on June 23rd, and the board continued that matter until August 18th, and really wanted a very clear understanding as to what the applicant was requesting at this period in time with respect to ongoing process with the Coastal Commission. So we'll see where we get on August 18th. They also requested that we agendize ordinances to rescind the development agreements, since those have not yet been perfected. And so the board will be considering rescinding those development agreements on August 18th. That will take 2 hearings, so we'll see where that goes as well. Yesterday, the board had 3 ordinances on their agenda, 2 of which affect this commission. The first is the noticing, and the board voted 4-0. Supervisor Centeno had to leave early, supporting your commission and the Montecito Planning Commission's action on that. It was really a quite positive experience, which was nice. We also brought forward the economic hardship ordinance, and there were a number of questions among the board members, but they ultimately voted 4-0 to approve that as well. And then the third was the ESH ordinance changes for Montecito, and those were also approved. And finally, there were 2 appeals on the agenda yesterday, and both were continued. One is within your jurisdiction, and it was the appeal of the High Meadows Road issue involving a project in the city of Solvang, and that was continued until next week, as Supervisor Centeno wanted to be available to deliberate on that matter. After the meeting of July 14th, the board will be taking a 1-month break, so they won't be meeting again until August 18th. So just wanted to let you know that as well, and I think that's all I had to report this morning.
Okay, thank you. That being the case, we'll go to our standard agenda, and Ms. Hoffman, if you'll read item number 2 into the record first. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is the hearing on the request of Pat Nesbitt, appellant/owner, to consider case number 09-APL-10, appeal filed on April 22nd, 2009, for an appeal of the director determination for an administrative interpretation to modify a tract map condition TM 14290 to provide temporary secondary access into the Montecito Ranch Estates.
Thank you. And as I understand it, this item, we wish to continue it to August 12th. So before we make that motion to do that, I'm just going to ask if there's anybody here that wants to speak to this item. I have no speaker slips, seeing no one arise, so we'll entertain a motion to continue this to August 12th.
Mr. Chair, I am prepared to make the motion to continue item number 1 to
Number
the
2.
commission. Item number 2, yes, right. The Montecito Ranch Estates appeal to the commission's regular agenda of August 12th, 2009.
I'll second that.
Seeing no further discussion, or Commissioner Cooney's, your light's on, is just ready to vote? Okay. Ms. Hoffman, if you'll call the roll.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Brooks?
Aye.
Commissioner Valencia?
Aye.
Commissioner Blau?
Aye.
Vote carries 5-0.
Thank you. Now, if you read item 1 into the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is the hearing on the request of James Malott, Lucinda Malott, and Carol Nanker, appellants, to consider the following. A09 APL1, appeal filed on January 5th, 2009. B09 APL5, appeal filed on February 23rd, 2009. And to accept the exemption pursuant to sections 15301E and 15305A of the state guidelines for implementation of CEQA.
Thank you. And do we have a staff report? Ms. Black.
Good
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Commission. I'm Sarah Clark, and I am going to give a brief presentation this morning. As you'll recall, at your last hearing on this item, you requested that the project go back to BAR for revised preliminary and to address the area of new footprint encroachment into the rear setback. So we did have a redesign of the project, and so I'm just going to give you a brief overview of what that is. Additionally, before we get started, there has been a change to the Sequent Notice of Exemption, which I believe you have been handed, and it's just to add language to describe the exemption for construction of small structures. So the revised project description, and you do have revised plans of these, includes a 4.5-foot rear yard setback encroachment and a 1.5-foot encroachment into the secondary front yard setback. For this project, that's the front yard setback along Evans Avenue, which is a 10-foot required setback. None of the new setback encroachment area involves any new footprint or new coverage area. It's all over top of the existing structures. The new construction will involve a 77-square-foot first-story addition and a 364-square-foot second-story addition. That's a slightly smaller square footage for the first story and a slightly larger for the second story, but only about, I think, 4 or 5 square feet. And they will continue to be demolishing the unpermitted shed and converting the garage back to a carport. So the existing development, just to review on the site, includes a 754-square-foot single-family dwelling, a 260-square-foot garage, as well as that storage shed, the unpermitted storage shed, and the unpermitted spa in the rear setback. Previously, the applicant had proposed to demolish the shed and demolish the spa, and to add that 360.6-square-foot second-story addition, along with an 82.2-square-foot first-story addition. And here, and as well as convert the 260-square-foot garage back to a carport. So here, shaded in red, you can see where that area of new footprint encroachment was in the rear yard setback. Here's the revised site plan. I'm sorry that this graphic isn't quite as clear as the last one. Again, we're demolishing the shed and the spa. The existing residence footprint will remain. And then there is the area of the 364 square foot second story addition and the 77 square foot first story addition. So you can see along this end here, there's a little encroachment into the secondary front setback, and there is no new encroachment footprint. That area has been eliminated right there. And again, the 260 square foot carport will be converted, or will be, so 260 square foot garage will be converted back to the carport. There have been a few changes to the elevations. Like I said, this returned to BAR and received revised preliminary approval. Subsequent to going through BAR, the applicant took the project back to the Summerlin BAR, which is sort of a voluntary community organization. Our BAR does defer heavily to them, but there were a few changes that were made at that point subsequent to Summerlin's review to the project. Summerlin had some comments on the railing and the roofing materials. So these are the old elevations, and here are the new ones, the east and the west. They also requested a revised roof pitch, and the plate heights were lowered slightly on the second floor to bring it back down to the height that you saw last time. So those are the changes to the project. Staff's recommendation remains the same: adopt the required findings for approval, deny the appeals, and approve the project.
Thank you. And now I'll ask my fellow commissioners for ex parte and site visits. For myself, I saw this project a long time ago. But
Mr. Chair, I think
Not
I
since
saw
then.
this project also
Yeah.
some time back.
okay, this is the point we will go to the appellant.
Good morning, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Jim Malott. I am representing the estate, actually, of Carol Nadker, who has died in the interim since this appeal was filed. And I would like to take enough time to address all of the items on the memorandum that you received from the Planning Commission. The reason being that we received this just 2 days ago, July 6th. We've had a day to prepare, but there are a number of items that we feel are incorrect and important to have on the record. So we would appreciate it if you wouldn't limit our time, but if I repeat, please tell me so. First of all, this hearing, we believe, should be happening after the BAR approval and the Summerlin approval, neither one of which are final, and both of which have considerably more issues than Ms. Clark suggested. The Summerlin BAR met 2 weeks ago. I was there, and among other things, they did suggest some of the changes that have been made here, but they also suggested that the carport itself should be a carport, not a half a garage, which is what has been designed here. Ms. Clark, if we could have the elevations back on the screen, I would appreciate it. If you notice on the upper left elevation, the lower right portion of that elevation is the garage, and it's fully shielded there, and they have 2 feet of storage there, which actually projects into the public right-of-way. None of that was approved by Summerlin. They said that it should be removed. The roofing material remains a metal here, although Summerlin said they did not approve a metal roof. They requested that the applicant, the designer, go back and readdress that because of the reflectivity of the roof, which is an issue that we brought up several times on this set of hearings. We further would like to point out that we have never seen any permit for the carport here. This carport is at issue because it projects into the public right-of-way. I don't know whether Ms. Clark has a copy of it, but there were no records when I looked at the county records, and I spent about a half a day looking for records of this project. There were no records of a carport being approved, ever. So that carport is at issue, and then it's also at issue that there has never been an addressing of the encroachment of this property into the public right-of-way, 19 feet along Evans Avenue, 17 feet along Banner Avenue, as that relates to putting a second story on the building. Our contention is that if the county is going to allow this major encroachment, which almost doubles the size of the lot, then the applicant's reason for putting a second story to preserve the lot size is silly. It doesn't make sense because they've already doubled their lot size. Furthermore, those encroachments take at least 5 parking spaces from the neighborhood. And what we've noticed is in your own set of documents on one of the last pages, you have a whole list of items, for instance, to include things such as construction parking. Well, there is no parking across the street on Banner Avenue. There is no parking in front of this building. There is no parking on the side of this building. There is parking in front of our property, and we'd suggest that that is an issue that should be addressed by somebody. It's never been addressed by the Summerlin BAR. They say, no, we just addressed the architectural work. It's never been addressed by your county BAR. They say, no, we just addressed the architecture and design. This body has never addressed it. Does somebody address this? It's a planning issue. It consists of it affects the neighborhood, but nobody seems to want to address it. In addition to that, all of the bodies have acquiesced to a condition where the project has cars backing into an intersection, blind on both sides due to 7-foot-high fences, and we contest that. We think that's just a silly parking solution. It's not safe, and this is an area that has a blind hill coming down at it. It's an accident waiting to happen. As of 2 weeks ago, there was no BAR approval from Summerlin, as I stated, but they didn't even give it a preliminary, really. They said, no, they don't like the roof line on this, and no, they don't like the balcony balusters, which are still shown as this kind of unusual design element. They did not want that. They don't particularly like any of the roof lines on it, but There were certainly no approvals, and there was no approvals for the materials. There was no approval for the color. We haven't seen a color board yet that's been approved. There has been no approval. So all of this is coming before you to resolve and then go back, I guess, to earlier boards for final approval. I think in large part the process here has been part of the problem. We have not been notified, or were not noticed, on 7 separate consecutive hearings. We were never noticed. We note thankfully that the county is changing that. We think in large part because of this issue that we have brought, which is, according to our attorneys, one of the major issues of litigation. It's unreasonable to expect people to not have notice on a critical issue that affects their properties. We notice in the memorandum here that a number of the issues on our appeal letter are not mentioned in the memorandum, so we would like to make sure that our appeal letter is attached as part of the record to this hearing. And starting with the memorandum on page 3, and I've numbered these consecutively based on the way they're stapled together. I've mentioned on page 2, on project description, that we've found no permit for the carport configuration, no permit for the carport at all. There was no approval for the carport there was nothing on the original drawings that we saw that had a carport. There was a house built totally on the property, and then all of a sudden the carport materialized. But on page 3, there is the first full paragraph, sort of the second paragraph on page 3 here, says, starting the modification section of the ordinance, does not address minimum setback requirements. I have read this 30 times, and I cannot make sense of what's happening here. The front setback should be treated as a side setback encroachments. I don't understand that. 3-foot minimum side yard setback requirement allowable with a modification and would not create any new building coverage in the secondary front setback area. I'm afraid this is so arcane that it doesn't make sense. I cannot understand it. Do we have a front yard? Do we have a side yard? On page 4, the next page, item 1.1.1, these are the findings and the Sequent findings. The project is consistent with the Coastal Act Comprehensive Plan, including the local coastal plan and any applicable community plan. Just because you say something is consistent doesn't mean that it is. For instance, there is no approval of the carport that we see. There is no storage allowed in the carport, and yet the applicant maintains it there. There's a back out into the intersection, which is, I'm sure, not approved in the comprehensive plan, the Coastal Act, or the local coastal plan. It can't be legal for the sheer issue of reasonable safety. It's detrimental to that. The lack of addressing of parking on the property. There is no parking on this property, period, for the applicant. There is merely parking adjacent to the property. Now, that can't be part of your local plan. Item 2.1.2. Project complies with the intent and purpose of the applicable zoning districts, including overlays. Everything in this area is a single-story residence, except this proposed project. Those items that the staff says, oh, there are 2-story residences around, They're on steep hillsides uphill of this, adjacent to. There is not a two-story house in this swale, period, as we've pointed out before. This is one of the smallest, if not the smallest, lots in this area. It's a mini lot. It's in an R2 zone, and it has half of the required lot size for this area. We're looking at how a lot with this small an area, with this many exceptions, with this many problems that are already in existence, that has created more problems because of the way it's been treated without permitting in the past, how this kind of project can be approved for a second story when no other second story exists in the community. Now, we recognize that there are second stories uphill that have much different topography, and because of the topography, have good views. But everything in this swale is built approximately 10 to 12 feet above the house downhill of it. And that means everybody gets a view. As soon as you do this, you start the trend for two stories in this whole swale. And we feel that that is one of the things that specifically is addressed in your Coastal Act, not to create situations where it sets a precedent that then will cascade into future problems. Item 2.1.3, the modification, this is also on page 4. The modification is a minor nature, will result in better site or architectural design as approved by the Board of Architectural Review, and will result in greater resource protection than the project without such modification. This finding can't be made. First of all, the architectural design is mishmash, as has been stated by Summerlin's Design Review Board, and quirky, as has been stated by the county BAR. One of the members of Summerlin actually stated it was kind of ugly. It takes view from other Evans Avenue neighbors and from the public. So we're concerned that you're trying to make findings here that can't be made. Page 5. 2.1.4, the project is compatible with the neighborhood and does not create an adverse impact to community character, aesthetics, or public view. It's already taken public views from Evans Avenue, patently obstructed, even the photographs show it. It's private views, it's obstructing private views. It has an adverse impact on the community character in that it is going to set a precedent for future actions in this area. I don't think this finding can be made at all, 2.1.4. 2.1.5, any modification of parking or loading zone requirements will not adversely affect the demand for on-street parking in the immediate area. Well, there is no parking in the immediate area because they've taken it all for a yard, and there's none across the street, because it's signed, no parking. So we feel that you can't make this finding, okay? It's already taking the 5 parking spots. There's no other street parking in the immediate area except in front of other people's homes. Maybe that's acceptable here. I just can't see how you can make this finding. 2.1.6, the project is not detrimental to existing physical access, light, solar exposure, ambient noise levels, or ventilation off-site. This finding cannot be made because of reflectivity of the metal roof. If you look at this building, it is due south of the Nantker property. Every morning, the sun rises to the south and east of this, and the roof slope is such that it will reflect into the Nantker residence. And the roof materials that have been proposed so far have all been in the 55% reflectivity range. That includes the blue roof and the gray roof, both of which are metal. At the very least, a number of the Design Review Board members have suggested comp shingles, which will reduce the reflectivity dramatically. .1.7, any adverse environmental impacts are mitigated to a level of insignificance. This is a finding that must be made. Well, environmental impacts, I think, include the safety at the intersection, the taking of 5 parking spaces, the reflective roof, the only 2-story in the immediate area, and taking a view at both the public and the private expense. Those are adverse environmental impacts, and that finding just can't be made. On the same page, item 2.2.1, the proposed development conforms to the applicable policies of the comprehensive plan, including coastal land use plan, and 2, with the applicable provisions of this article, or the project falls within the limited exceptions allowed under 35-161, non-conforming uses.
Are we getting close to concluding out?
I'm going to finish, sir. I've paid for this appeal, and I want it on the record in case of any litigation in the future, but I will expedite as much as I can.
Thank you.
2.2.1, this comprehensive plan does not allow for taking of public views, taking of public parking, taking of land for private use, or the multiple exceptions issue is moot. 2.2.2 on page 6. The proposed development is located in a legally created lot. We have no problem with that. We think it's actually quite legal as a lot. We do not think it's legal as a double-sized lot, or one that encroaches without proper hearings into the public right-of-way and takes the parking space. 2.2.3, subject property and development on the property is compliance with all laws. We don't believe that's true because we don't find any permit for the carport, and certainly it's been encroached upon in all directions by this and previous owners. Okay, page 7. We're now on the environmental document, the notice of exemption. Reasons to support exemption findings. The guidelines for implementation of Sequent exempts minor lot line adjustments, side yard setback variances not resulting in the creation of any new parcel. No environmental impacts would be associated with reduction of the rear yard setback requirement. Well, that's just not true. It has great environmental impact both on the loss of ocean view for the public and for the loss of ocean view for the neighborhood and the reflectivity into the neighbor's yard. Page 8. By the way, that previous item also says there will be no obstruction of any scenic views open to the public. I don't know if you've been out there within the last few days, but somebody downhill pruned a lot of trees, and all of a sudden there's an ocean view again. The staff claimed there was no ocean view because of tree blockage at an earlier hearing. Okay, exceptions. This is item 15300.2 of Sequent, item A. I don't think anybody's taken into account that this property is actually at the downhill end of the drainage swale for the entire valley above it. I know we've dealt with that problem on several occasions uphill of this property. We're concerned that since this is a clay area that's been in constant motion, there's a 30-inch diameter culvert that goes underneath this property. We don't believe that a second story is a wise idea over this culvert, but we haven't seen anybody even mention it so far. It also has to do with the clean out or washout area that is mentioned later in the requirements for construction. If this project or one like it is approved, we would request that proper consideration be made of all of the drainage issues in this area. page 10, on the second paragraph after number 1, the staff again mentions a permitted carport configuration. So far, we've found nothing to show it's permitted, although the staff claims it is. And on page 11, there's a clause here that says, these standard conditions, item 7 is including the developer shall defend, indemnify, and hold harmless the county or its agents from any claim, action against the county officers or employees. We think that's an important issue here too, that this issue is so contentious and has been so poorly handled, particularly as to noticing, that its likelihood of going to court is real. On page 12, the date of approval is mentioned as July 8th, 2009, and yet it's said that it has to be appealed by May 18th. I think that's just a typo, but that needs a little clarification. And we've mentioned the other issues in our hearing, in our previous remarks. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And now I'll go to the applicant for rebuttal, Christina Tracy. So there are two appellants? Okay. Lucinda Mallet?
I just want to ask about this coastal permit that's supposed to be granted today, and that we're able to appeal by, I'm trying to find the paper here, by May 18th. Is that supposed to be June 18th?
Mr. Chairman and Mrs. Malat, yes, that is supposed to be July 18th. That is
July or June? July, right, sorry.
July 18th, yes,
Okay.
that's just a typo there.
Okay. One of the things that I noticed when I read through all this stuff is that in order to grant a coastal approval, I think it's called a coastal development permit, it says that the final BAR review and approval shall be obtained prior to issuance of the coastal development permit. I don't believe that there has been any final approval from Summerland or from the Santa Barbara architectural people or anything, so I don't know what this is even in here for. Is there some reason why this has been included? It doesn't seem to me that it makes sense to approve something when you don't have any of the conditions met for approval of that particular item. And that's a major thing, getting the coastal permit. I just would like to say that this is really important to us. We have lived and owned property in Summerland since 1976. We've paid a lot of taxes there. We have been residents there. We have voted and done what we needed to do. And this is going to have a really huge effect on our property and the enjoyment of our outdoor space. One of the things that has also not been mentioned before, I don't think, is the fact that this second story is going to cast shadows onto our pool area, which is where we spend our time outside, at certain times of the year, particularly in the winter. And it's going to change our ability to use this area at that time. And I think that's something that needs to be considered as an environmental impact. I also feel there's been an awful lot of exemptions made for this property along the way. It's a tiny little place. It's meant to be a tiny little place. It isn't meant to be a mansion, and I think a second story is really not an appropriate thing here. The room that the Tracys want to have, that need to have for a master bedroom, could easily be built on the ground floor, as was done next door with the Rhodes property. The design review comment, which really got to me, was that this is quirky and therefore appropriate for Summerland. I don't know about you, but I don't want quirky in front of my property for the rest of my life, for 365 days a year, 24/7. Quirky could go Halloween night, maybe somewhere, but not something that's being built in front of my home. I don't think any of you would want quirky in front of your house. So, I guess that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Christina Tracy? Sure. I don't have a slip for Tom, so if you're the applicant, fine, come on up.
Good morning, Chair Blau, Commission members. I'm Tom Smith. I'm the architect representing Christina and Reed Tracy for this property here. I am not going to go point by point by point by point by point by point by point over the stuff that was just said. I will say that I do agree with Mr. Malott. This is a mini lot. This is a tiny lot. The existing house that's on it is under 750 square feet. We are looking to increase it to the FAR guidelines for Summerland, which I believe is 1197. I don't know where in the world that qualifies for a mansion. As I said before, what we're taking is an extremely tiny house and trying to turn it into a small house, and that's it. As far as the land grab, so-called, goes, there's an easy solution for this, and the solution is at such time when the Public Works Department decides that they are going to enlarge Evans Avenue or Banner Avenue, whatever's on there comes down. It's just the way it works with the Roads Department. We went to them, we did our research as well, and with all due respect to Mr. Malott, just because of the nature of Summerland and the nature of record keeping in previous decades, just because you don't find a permit doesn't necessarily mean that there wasn't one or plans. The carport is definitely within the memory of the Summerland Citizens Association, and they agreed with us. We have not heard anybody characterize this as ugly, and the quirky was meant in a nice way to complement the rest of the style or the ambiance of Summerland. We think we have this style. It's kind of a beach cottage kind of style, and then we think that this works well. Because it's such a small lot, because of the constraints on it, we have a building envelope, as you've seen, which is tiny, and most of the existing house overlaps it. Most houses in Summerland probably do that themselves. If we tried to do a one-story design, we would not be able to get anywhere near the size that what we're trying now. We would end up with a pretty unhappy client. And it's true that we had to do this with the Rhodeses next door. And the Rhodeses did that under duress. The Rhodeses did that because they were threatened with lawsuits from these very same people. The Rhodeses come from England. They have a great fondness for gardens. They have a great fondness for having a dog. They had to forego both because of this, but they reluctantly went ahead and did it. And it still took a variance to do it anyways. What we're asking for is for a zoning modification. And after talking with staff, with our planner, a one-story design would actually, in order to do what it needs to be done, instead of a mod, would require a zoning variance, which is much harder to get, and the conditions for approval do not include the approval of the neighbor next door. That's not, in other words, we would not be able to get findings for a variance, amazingly enough, for a one-story as opposed to this. And this is the design that the owners really, really would like. Now, we took this to after the meeting, our last planning commission meeting, we redesigned the second floor. We took it back to SBAR. They liked it. They actually complimented on it. There was no, nobody was reeling back in horror. But they wanted to make sure that Summerland had a look at it. We took it to Summerland. Because of the redesign, the ridge moved up in elevation about 8 inches. And so Summerland said, we need to have this ridge back down, keep it at the same point that the Planning Commission saw it. And so in order to accomplish that, we went from a 5 and 12 pitch, we shallowed it a little bit to 4 3/4, and shaved a couple inches off the top plate, and that way we brought it back down, so now we're at the same height that this board saw the last time we were here. SBAR looked at the roof. They saw the blue color that this board saw, and agreed that it was too blue and too reflective. And I had some other samples, and they picked a low reflectivity coating called Storm Gray, which reflects about 29%. And their comments reflect that in the minutes. Summerlin saw that, and Summerlin wasn't really happy with that still, and I understand the issues with reflectivity. They suggested alternate materials. They certainly did not want that. Well, we went back and we have found another variation. It's a metal roof. It's a rust color, but the surface, instead of being smooth, the surface is a rougher surface. It has the same reflectivity as the low gloss gray. In other words, 29%, not 54. And instead of reflecting it, being smooth, reflecting it in a tight pattern, being rough, it scatters it more. So we're going to go back and try this. But in any event, the appeal point, as I understand it, comes with preliminary approval. We've received revised preliminary approval from both SBAR and Summerlin. Things about the roof type, color, and that sort of thing, as I understand it, these things can be worked out prior to final approval, which we still need final approval, of course, from Summerlin and most importantly from SBAR. So there are a few things that we did not adopt that Summerlin asked. We went back to that railing design. We feel that fits better. That's really not the purview, I believe, of the commission here, but just to kind of touch on things, we've come up with a new color palette, which we will be submitting to SBAR and to Summerlin. And we feel that a carport, it's very common for carports to have a little bit of storage at the end. It's not a half garage. It is a carport. It is open on the front. It's open on the side. The only place where it's not open is across the back, which is the back wall of the storage closet, which is 2 feet deep. And that's about all I can say. I don't want to keep beating this thing. But all we're doing is, again, we're trying to on a very tiny lot, which is, as they admit, the smallest lot in this neighborhood. And what they don't mention is theirs is probably up to 3 times larger. We're taking a very tiny house on a very tiny lot and making it a small house. And that's what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Cooney has a question for you.
I do for you, Mr. Smith.
Yes, sir.
One of the issues mentioned by the appellant was the lack of parking on site, and one of the conditions in the proposed coastal development permit is that all construction parking shall be on site. How do you intend to accomplish that?
All construction parking shall be on site. Well, we'll have to adhere to that. We'll have to. It probably will take a redoing of the yard when we're done, but certainly the fence comes down along where it currently has it, where you currently park right now. Of course, that fence definitely comes down, but they'll have to pull in there and park on site.
Well, it's a
about all I
small
can
lot,
say.
as you've indicated,
Yes.
so it does appear it's a condition. It's not a condition of the county's review before us today, but
All right.
in our attachment, we do have a proposed coastal development permit, and
I
that may
see.
be a part of every coastal development permit. But I do see it here as a condition. I just
Okay.
was curious as to how it would happen.
Well, then we'll have to adhere to that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Christina Tracy?
Thank you, Commission. Thanks for hearing this. Just a little bit. Well, first I need to address that because indeed, the house isn't quirky in a bad way, and we built that, we designed that house to go in Summerland, obviously. It's board and batten with a standing seam roof. It'll look like an old farmhouse that's been there for a long time. There's nothing modern or odd about it. The color we're proposing is off-white, so there really isn't anything odd, ugly, or quirky about it. Summerland is eclectic. We all know that. That is one of the reasons we bought there. However, we do want to remodel it because 750 less square feet is a little bit small for the four of us. We're only asking for 364 square feet. And we know that the only reason Mr. Malott is trying to stop us is because he has an old 70s house that he doesn't live in above us. That's as big as our house and the roads lot. It's those two lots combined. He's directly above us with his house right over the roads. He thinks we're going to be in his view, which we're not, and which we have pictures of we can show because it's a bedroom and a bathroom, and it doesn't affect his view, and there's not much view from there anymore anyway because there's giant eucalyptus trees in front of everything. If there is a view, it's the freeway. That's the only reason that he could be doing all this. He keeps bringing up these things that we have nothing to do with. The carport, which has been there forever. The fence, we didn't do the fence. The paint colors, the parking, none of this, which there's 2 parking spots now. And when that fence comes down and you park in the carport, you could easily get 3 cars in our driveway on the bricks that are ours in that space. Plus, we don't care about the yard because we know it'll get ripped up anyway, so we certainly could have a truck park on the front, right in the front grass there if they needed to during construction. I don't really understand why he has such a large say in this. I don't have any say in his house, which I would love to talk about. I don't have any say in the house in front of me that I look at, which the man who lives there is lovely. His roof is blue tarps, tin, pieces of wood and plastic, and that's what I look out of my front window, and I don't say anything about that. The house below us, 3 houses up, has shells, doll heads, boat parts nailed all over his house. I don't have any say about that, and that's fine. That's what he wants to do. There are several standing seam roofs in our town, including the new store, the Just Folk store, which has that kind of roof, which looks nice, and that's a board and batten style as well. Again, we didn't put up the fence, the carport, the shed, and the spa. The shed and the spa have already been removed. They're not even there anymore. We've already converted the garage back to a garage, and we're happy to knock off those walls whenever you say it's okay. We're just asking for a little bit. We're not going to block anyone's view, and our remodel will only improve the neighborhood. It'll bring the value of all the properties up, including Mr. Malott's, which, again, he does not live there. So when he talks about all these hardships, please remember that. He does not live there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's the last I have from speaker slips. Mr. Malott, this is your opportunity to do a rebuttal, and we would hope that it's not a repeat of your earlier testimony, but that you're going to speak to the items that the applicant talked about.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
We would point out the fact that everything on this house in the way of colors and materials is highly visible to us. A light-colored house such as a white house would be highly reflective. The background that we look at is the ocean and trees and foliage, and we would respectfully request that any color choices be both dark and muted in colors, not reds, not blues, but soft gray-greens and elements that will blend with the background. We think that just because somebody wants an old farmhouse look is no reason to grant a highly reflective and highly in-your-face look. There's no screening between our 2 houses. So we request that the the design review boards, I believe, have jurisdiction over this, but if this body has an issue here, that should be one. And with regard to the view blockage, of course it blocks our view. It's right in the middle of the dining room and the living room view from our house. Our house is not facing the same direction the Tracy house is. It's actually facing right at the Tracy house. So both the living room, dining room, and the living room, and the kitchen views, all the views of the house look right at it. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no more further slips, I will close it to public comment and bring it back to the commission. Commissioner Brown has a question.
Thank you. Ms. Clark, what is the definition of a carport?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Brown, I need a moment to look that up in the
Oh, okay,
in Article
thank you.
2. Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Brown, Article 2 does not define carport.
Does the department have a sort of a standing, unofficial definition of what it is, or the number of walls, or?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Brown, the definition of a garage is a building. So a carport is something less than a building. Typically, a carport has an open front and open sides. Sometimes it has a rear wall.
Commissioner Cooney, this is a first district item. How do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chair, why don't I give my thoughts about the project? This is our second hearing on this matter, and then I would like to hear feedback from my fellow commissioners. But I want to say, first of all, with regard to the process, there is no hearing that I've attended as a member of the Planning Commission in the last 5 years that has had any less time and attention per amount of issue than this one. Mr. Malat has been provided an opportunity to state his position on 2 occasions, and the chair has been lenient with regard to items presented. We've heard in a number of ways the very basic issues stated as they are repeated during the aspects of the staff report, including the proposed findings and conditions. I have no objection to Mr. Malat taking the time he needs to state his position, but I just want to make clear that he has had a full and ample hearing, and certainly as much as any other applicant or appellant, as is the case here. With regard to notice, I'm not sure that notice has been adequate at earlier stages of this proceeding. Mr. Malat says notice was inadequate and that his counsel agrees with that. But I do want to observe that he's had adequate notice of the Planning Commission hearings for this appeal, and certainly has had an ample opportunity to address the issues of design before the design review boards, both in Summerlin and for the South Board of Architectural Review. So I think whatever notice problems occurred early on have been mitigated and satisfied now with regard to these hearings. With regard to view impacts, I have no doubt that there is an impact on the view from the Malat and Anchor property. But I've been up and down Evans Avenue a number of times, and I couldn't find any point along that right-of-way, including directly above the encroachment on Evans Avenue, where the impact of the proposed addition would have a significant view impact. It isn't just one or two trees or even a dozen trees. It's a whole hedge of trees that are impacted by the view from public viewing points. So I disagree with his conclusion that that's a significant environmental impact. With regard to the issues, at least I had concern about, and I believe other members of the commission did on our first hearing, the reflectivity of the roof, the height of the roof. These issues were specifically focused on by the design review boards, and perhaps that issue isn't closed, but I am convinced by Mr. Smith's presentation that it's moving in the right direction. It's a big change to go from 54% to 29% reflectivity. Now he's suggesting that the rough pattern of the roof material would diffuse the light even further, and we certainly want to be sensitive to the impact of the uphill neighbor from sunlight, and there certainly is a sunlight issue. With respect to the wall colors, I don't believe off-white would be a reflective problem, but if it is in the eyes of the Malats, they certainly have the ability to address that issue before final approval by the BAR. So on balance, my feeling is that concessions have been made, the building has been modified to the benefit of the Nankers, and as such, I'd be prepared to support the original project and deny the appeal.
Thank you. Mr. Valencia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I agree with Commissioner Cooney. I looked at the problems with respect to parking, and Mr. Malat indicated that they won't be able to park any cars on there. Well, in the map that I have, I could see where I could park a couple of parked cars in the driveway, besides one in the carport. So that was refuted. As far as backing out, that's that neighborhood there, everybody backs out, you know. Noticing, I guess we're taking care of that. No storage. Mr. Smith indicates that there will be storage in the back of the carport. No permits for the carport. Well, apparently they researched it on both sides, and there's two answers to that, and it's difficult to tell what the problem is there. Most of the problems that Mr. Malat brought up are very small problems, not something that can't be resolved. And a majority of I would think the major problem is their privacy, but we don't protect privacy, one. And second, I would think that they would be working with with Mr. Smith concerning the color of the building and the BAR to make sure that they don't get a reflective color, because that would be the most damaging thing, is standing out there in their pool and watching that. So that isn't something that we're going to work out here. It's something that they need to work out with them. And if I were the Tracy's, I wouldn't want to have a neighbor angry at me. Not going to paint that unit bright red or bright yellow or something to antagonize them. I want to live in harmony. So at this particular point, I find that the staff recommendation is something I can go with, and I'm going to support Commissioner Cooney. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Brooks.
Yes, thank you, Chair Blau. Before coming today, I went over the original appeal letter, and I do have it in my file, and I felt that reviewing what we discussed at the last hearing, many of the issues that were brought up were answered for me in a satisfactory way. Now, looking at what we've discussed today and looking at the changes that have been made, I too feel that the Tracy's have been very accommodating in changing the roof material, on the recommendation of the bar. The carport, it's going to be an attractive carport, I would say. It's interesting that we don't have a definition for carports. The parking issue on the road, again, that's not, we can't, that County Roads probably does need to go in and see what they can do to help that. But hopefully, with the new construction, that there will be some more off-street parking there that will be provided. Again, I think the applicant has been willing, to make adjustments, and I too will support the staff's recommendation and the motion.
Commissioner Brown.
Thank you. Like my fellow commissioners, I support Commissioner Cooney and the staff's recommendation. I would like to make these following comments. I believe that the applicant has made some concessions, particularly for privacy. I think there were some windows last time that they've eliminated those, that they're not overlooking the Malot's property. And I guess my only thought would be if we send it to the BAR if there are any concerns about color and roof material, that they be expressed so that the BARs consider those further. And that would be my only thought. I do agree with the appellant that maybe a color other than white, something that would be softer, that would sort of, and this white is certainly not going to be reflective. I don't ever see any house materials that are reflective, and I don't even see many roofing materials that are reflective, let alone metal roofs. But I appreciate the applicant wanting to do, considering a further reduction of any reflectivity, and perhaps they would consider a roof that there is no reflection. But those would be my only thoughts of any changes or any recommendations to the BAR. Thank you.
Thank you. No long speeches from me. The issue of privacy of view corridors is only one that happens from a public viewpoint. The fact that we can't disapprove a project because it creates some view problem for a private property next door. So, Commissioner Cooney, I think we're ready for your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will then move to support the denial of the Malott and Anchor appeal and upholding of the project as modified in accordance with the recommendation of staff as shown on the screen, including adopting the required findings and also taking into consideration the additional basis for a Sequent exemption that was presented today. I'll let it stand at that. That's the motion.
I'll second it. Any further discussion from commissioners? Ms. Manwellen.
Mr. Chair, if I can just make one clarification on the motion. Just what's missing on the screen is just actually accepting the notice of exemption as revised. I know Commissioner Cooney noted or referenced the notice, but I just want to make sure that's in the motion.
Commissioner Cooney, is that in your motion?
That is.
It's in my second as well. Okay, seeing no further discussion, Ms. Oppen, if you'll call the roll.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Brooks?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown? Sorry. Commissioner Valencia?
Aye.
Commissioner Blau.
Aye.
Vote carries 5-0.
Thank you. We'll take a 5-minute break here for the next item. Even though we're missing Commissioner Cooney, we'll go ahead and get this item read into the record. Ms. Hoffman, if you would.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is the hearing on the request of Steve Fort, agent for the property owners, Stafford Kelly and Elaine Lauenstein, Parcel 1, and Jorgen Stahl, Parcel 2, to consider the following. A08 LLA 13, application filed on September 16, 2008. B09 RZN 5, application filed on March 10, 2009, and to accept the exemption pursuant to Section 15305 of the state guidelines for implementation of CEQA.
Thank you. And now I'll ask my fellow commissioners for ex partes and site visits. Commissioner Brown.
Mr. Chair, I made a site visit on Monday afternoon, drove onto the property, and that was all I did. But actually, the map is probably a little more helpful in understanding the property than the drive on the property, but anyway.
Mr. Cooney.
I did make a site visit. It was a little bit breathtaking, both in terms of view and in terms of trying to re-enter Highway 154 on Monday afternoon.
Thank you. Okay, we have
I made an attempt, Mr. Chair, and traffic prevented me from going in there.
there you go. Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Lesha. So we have a staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the Commission, my name is Jay Ritterbeck. I'm the planner for the Stall project. The project site is located at 1806 and 1812 San Marcos Pass Road, just north of San Antonio Creek Road. Parcel 1, the northern parcel, is 3.82 acres and currently zoned 40 E1. Parcel 2, the southern parcel, is 2.96 acres and currently zoned Ag 40. Both parcels are legal lots, but non-conforming as to size. As part of this project, there is a proposed county-initiated consistency rezone to amend the existing antiquated Ordinance 661 zone classifications to Ag 240, consistent with the current county LUDC. Also proposed as part of this project is a lot line adjustment to move the existing parcel boundary, shown as the horizontal yellow line here, to a vertically oriented lot line that would result in no net change in parcel size. In the next series of slides, I'll show the Commission a detailed view of the proposed project. As currently configured, the existing development on Parcel 1 includes only a 3,750 square foot single-family dwelling. Parcel 2 currently contains an existing 781 square foot single-family dwelling with a carport, an existing swimming pool adjacent to the SFD,
We got it.
Yeah, go ahead.
It flashed up there.
Yeah, there you go.
This presentation is
That's okay, go ahead.
400 square foot cabana, currently under review under a separate permit application and addressed in condition number 2 of the staff report. An existing second pool adjacent to this cabana, and a spa. This is the location of the spa. Finally, there is an existing putting green located directly in the center of Parcel 2. The proposed development that is part of this project includes a zoning map amendment, which proposes to rezone Parcel 1 from 40 E1 to Ag 240, and rezone Parcel 2 from 40 AL also to Ag 240. The project also proposes a lot line adjustment. Currently, the non-conforming lots, again, are 3.82 acres and 2.96 acres. The reconfigured lots would have no net change in size. Additionally, as currently configured, Parcel 2 contains several structures that were constructed to the benefit and use of Parcel 1. The reconfigured lot line would bring ownership of these structures into Parcel 1's boundary. Finally, the proposed development envelopes would contain all existing development and limit any future development to be located within these areas. These areas contain slopes that average 20% or less. The project is exempt from further environmental review pursuant to Sequent Section 15305. In summary, as conditioned within the staff report, the proposed project is consistent with the County Comprehensive Plan, Chapter 21 subdivision regulations, and the applicable requirements of the County Land Use Development Code. Upon review, staff recommends that the Commission adopt the required findings for approval as specified in Attachment A, adopt an ordinance zoning map amendment as specified in the draft ordinance included as Attachment D, accept the Sequent exemption specified in Attachment B, and adopt a resolution recommending that the Board of Supervisors approve the project, subject to the conditions specified in Attachment C. This concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you. Any questions of staff from the commission? Commissioner Cooney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is for Ms. Van Mullum. With regard to the Sequent exemption, Section 15305, I didn't have a chance to look it up, and I'm sure you did. Is the 20% slope limitation such that we can consider it only as to the location of the buildings, or does it affect the entire lot? In other words, is this exemption available in this instance?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Cooney, I actually did ask this exact question to Mr. Ritterbeck, and it's available in areas with an average slope of less than 20%, and that's the case in this site.
Thank you.
Seeing no more, does the applicant wish to address the commission? Please step to the microphone.
Good morning, Commissioner and Commission members. My name is Steve Fort. I'm with Suzanne Elledge Planning and Permitting, and I am representing the applicant. And I just wanted to say we're in support of the staff report and appreciate Jay's work on this, and hope that you'll adopt the findings for approval, adopt the findings necessary for the Sequent exemption, and the resolution recommending approval to the Board of Supervisors. And I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I would ask now for any other public comment, but there's nobody else out there, so I assume that we're not going to see any more. Commissioner Brown, this is a second district item. I wish to proceed.
Just to hear from my fellow commissioners. I have no introductory comments.
Commissioner Valencia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This looks like a regular housekeeping job, and I have no problem with the requirement. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Brooks.
Thank you, Chair Blau. I was looking through the other materials, and again, the slope, and I'm thinking, I did not make a visitation, but I did hear from one person that it is quite a dangerous ascent, but I did see that there will be some regrading of the access as recommended by the fire department. Just it says regrading the existing 20% slope to 18%. I don't know if that's, I guess that would be adequate, for fire safety. I did not see any issues. I appreciate the presentation this morning to show the different configurations. Thank you. No other questions.
Mr. Cooney.
With respect to the particular request before us, I don't have a problem. I I would be very concerned if we were looking at something that would intensify development in that particular location. The driveway, I live on a steep driveway. I know it can be engineered so that it can be safe for emergency equipment. I think this driveway does need some work, but it's obviously been used by emergency equipment in the very recent past. The outer reaches of the Jesusita fire came onto this property, and fortunate for all, it was saved by what must have been heroic efforts. But it is and will continue to be in the path of wildfires in all directions. So I think that the fire department's had an opportunity to look at this and to consider whether significant improvements need to be made to the access driveway, and they're advising relatively minor improvements. The second issue, I just need to go on the record and indicate that the access, or I should say the egress from the property to Highway 154 is nearly suicidal. Cars coming in both the directions, up and down the path, move at a rapid speed, and the line of sight is miserable in both directions. So probably, I don't know how people live with that, but perhaps they turn right and go up the hill to a safe turnaround and come back down. But in any event, this application is not asking for any additional development with respect to intensifying the habitation, and therefore I can support it.
Commissioner Brown?
You have no comments?
I'm supporting it. This
Okay,
is
great.
a
Okay, no, it
no-brainer.
is I think it is a housekeeping item, and I do agree that the ingress and egress is challenging. You have to wait there by the roadside, and you got to be quick. It'd be interesting, just as an aside, if someone were coming today to develop this property, if conditions would be different. But anyway, it is what it is, and it's a housekeeping that we're basically doing here. So I would like to support the staff's recommendations to adopt the required findings for the cases numbers 09 RZN string 5 and 08 LLA string 13 as specified in attachment A of the staff report, including the Sequent findings. Adopt an ordinance zoning map amendments for these two APNs, amending the inland zoning map from 40 AL and 40 E1 to 40 Ag 2. Accept the exemption pursuant to the Sequent Section 15305, included as attachment B, and adopt the resolution recommending that the board approve the project.
Second.
Thank you. Just a question. The report I'm looking at here says that, make sure I got the right property. The same exemption is 15303E, or is it 305?
305.
It's 15305.
Oh, you're right, I'm on the last one, thank you, gotcha, that's what I thought, okay, great.
15305.
I have more questions to, Ms. Black.
Mr. Chair, just one other clarification. We did distribute this morning a revised attachment D, which is the resolution and ordinance. And it just had a...
Oh, okay, to include the revised attachment.
It didn't change the substance.
Okay.
It just had a typo in it.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a motion, did I hear a second from Commissioner Valencia? Good. Any further discussion? Ms. Commissioner Brown, do you have other things to add?
No,
Oh,
I'm just waiting to vote.
Commissioner, Ms. Oppen, if you read the roll call.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Brooks?
Aye.
Commissioner Valencia?
Aye.
Commissioner Blau?
Aye.
Vote carries 5-0.
Thank you, and if you'll, are we ready to go on the last item? Okay, Ms. Oppen, if you'll read it into the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is a hearing on the request of Juan Beltranena, agent for the owner, County of Santa Barbara, to consider the following. A 08 DVP 20, application filed on June 3rd, 2008. B 08 CDP 187, application filed on November 21st, 2008. And to accept the exemption pursuant to Section 15303E of the state guidelines for implementation of Sequent.
Thank you. Ms. Black.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to let the commission know that Mr. Beltranena isn't able to be here today. He is up at the Coastal Commission meeting on the Goleta Beach item. So I think Aaron is set to give the staff presentation. I think we're prepared to answer any questions the commission may have.
Great.
Mr. Chair, while we're waiting, I'd like to make a comment that we started this project years ago when Chuck Oberdeck was still here. He was planning commissioner of the 5th District, and I recall I went on my site visit, and he was ahead of me, and this is how far back this project goes. Chuck Oberdeck, remember him well.
Great. Aaron, go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. Today I'd like to present to you the Walter Capps Memorial Park. The project site is located at Oceanside in an urban portion of the Isla Vista Master Plan area. The site is located within the coastal zone, is comprised of 12 legal parcels totaling approximately 1.2 acres in size, and is zoned SRM 8, Student Residential Medium Density. A public park is a principally permitted use in this zone district, so it does not require a conditional use permit. Here's a close-up of the site to give you a little bit of the neighborhood context. A couple of things to note about the site. Number one is that the site is currently undeveloped, and the only vertical hindrances to public views would be these 2 or 3 existing eucalyptus trees here in the southeast corner. Otherwise, the site is completely open to views of the Channel Islands as seen from Del Playa or anywhere within the site. Secondly, the site is completely surrounded by residential uses, and these residential uses here to the east and west are very close to those property lines. The project is a request for a development plan and a coastal development permit to develop a new public park, including landscaping, hardscaping, irrigation improvements, bicycle parking, and a public restroom. And this is the landscape plan. And you can see the restroom structure here in the northwest corner. The bicycle parking is in between the restroom and the street. And the site would be landscaped with about 4 different concepts in different areas. The first concept is an open turf area, which would basically be a playing field, just a grass field where people could have limited active uses like frisbee or bocce ball or playing catch or whatever. The second area would be this meadow area here, and this area would be landscaped with native grasses and poppies. And the intent of this area is not to be used so much as to kind of appear as a seasonal meadow. The third area is along the coastal bluff, and that would be planted with native shrubs and perennials. All the landscaping in this project is native and drought tolerant. And this would allow users of the park to look over the coastal bluff, would maintain all the views that the site has to offer. But what it would do is by planting drought tolerance here, it would help stabilize the edge of the coastal bluff and slow down the historic bluff retreat on the site. And then lastly, adjacent to those residential uses that I pointed out before, we would plant, the project would plant native trees. And the intent there is again to maintain the openness of the site, but afford a little bit of privacy for those residences that are adjacent to it. And here's a layout of the landscape plan, and I know this is difficult to understand, but I can just explain this conceptually. The turf area would be, because this is the only area that requires irrigation year-round, this area would be underlain with what's called an EPIC subgrade water delivery system. And what this subgrade, effectively it acts as a pan to collect water and to keep water from percolating into the ground. And how this works is the grass grows its roots directly into the subgrade system. Water can be delivered into the system and into the grass, and also during the rainy season, it acts as a catchment system, and it actually catches and holds rainwater for use by the lawn as it's needed. All the other irrigation on site, including the drip system along the coastal bluff and the temporary rotor systems that would be installed to irrigate the meadow area, all of this after 2 years would be removed. So once all these plants are established, the irrigation system would be removed. And as an added layer of protection, the project would also install several top-of-the-line moisture sensors along the coastal bluff to ensure that the system is working properly, to monitor the moisture levels in the soil, and to alert landscaping staff when there may be a leak or a break in the system so that they can go out there and fix it. Quickly, the restroom details. There would be 2 different restrooms, a storage room in the middle. Trellis would be added to the north elevation as seen from the street to kind of beautify the area. And then there would be landscaping green screens on each side, and then clinging vines would be planted to overtake the trellis there. The project was reviewed twice conceptually by the South Board of Architectural Review, once on September 5th, 2008, and then again on June 5th, 2009. It received positive comments, with the BIR commenting specifically that the irrigation plan is terrific. The SBAR directed the project to return for preliminary and final approval after project approval by the Planning Commission. Environmental review of the project was covered by an exemption, section 15303E, which is new construction. And as detailed in the staff report, the exceptions to the exemptions do not apply. As conditioned, the project is consistent with the comprehensive plan, including the coastal land use plan, the Goleta community plan, and the Isla Vista master plan, and is also consistent with the Article 2 and Ivy master plan form-based code zoning requirements. Staff's recommendation is to adopt the required findings, including the CEQA findings, approve the exemption, and approve the project subject to the conditions included in Attachment B.
Thank you. Any questions from commissioners? Mr. Brown.
Mr. Briggs, the landscape plan, I guess this is a new concept that's being used for the grass, for the lawn area in terms of the substrate. And the way you described it is that it will help to prevent the water flowing to the bluff and eroding the bluff face. My question is, though, during rainy season, what happens to the lawn? Because the pan restricts water from going down into the ground, does the lawn then become sort of like a little marshy if we have extended rains over a period of time? How does that work?
No, the system is designed, I'm sorry, excuse me. The system is designed with an overflow. And one fact that I didn't mention in my presentation was that the site would be graded and recontoured to direct drainage away from the coastal bluff and into the street. Okay. And similarly, the pan underneath the turf area would be gently sloped. I think it's about 1%, and it would overflow into an area where it could be collected and then directed into the storm drain. So we wouldn't have a saturated lawn area or a pond, so to speak.
And my second question is the bluff face now. Did they do a study to note how fragile it was, or if it's fairly stable, or do you have any information on that at the current time?
The bluff in this area of Isla Vista retreats fairly quickly compared to other areas of the county, and historically the building official has walked the beach below this bluff on an almost annual basis. And I did speak with him directly on this project, and he has historical data that details the retreat rate of all the properties along Del Playa. So we were able to look at those retreat rates and get a very good idea of what might happen to this site in the future.
So was landscaping planned with that in mind? Or?
Absolutely.
Okay. So you'd indicated that the landscaping will help to slow down bluff retreat, I guess, because as we see on the other properties, they have a lot of hardscape and the water just runs down the bluff face, and here it's not going to.
That's correct.
The thought. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Cooney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two issues. First of all, I think the parking concept is fabulous, and most of the staff report is addressed to the concept and the details of how the park is to be laid out. I have a concern about its use, ultimately. When I read the project description, it's very broad. It says the park would provide both active and passive recreational uses for members of the Isla Vista community, which is everything, from picnicking to organized flag football games. And what my concern is that this not fall into the jurisdiction of a recreational entity that might schedule regular league play, for example, softball or football or any other sport that would preempt the use of the park from what I think is its real value, inviting any residents of Isla Vista to go there and enjoy the views. I'm as strong a supporter of organized recreation sports, but I would like this park to be free of that concern. A pickup game, no problem, but I wondered as I read this, is this going to be one of the parks the Isla Vista Park and Recreation District could use for its, no doubt, extensively used competition sports?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Cooney, there's nothing in the project description or in the conditions that restrict those particular uses of the park, but I believe if someone were to schedule a regular event through IVRPD, it's going to require some kind of a permit through the county or some kind of a review.
Well, I'm not so sure, Mr. Briggs, because we don't, as far as I know, the county parks doesn't review the use of other parks where they're scheduled, for active recreation in the sense of organized leagues where the participants pay a fee and there are officials and schedules and so forth. So I'm just wondering if others share my concern, we can't broaden or I shouldn't say broaden as much as make more specific the project description so that it excludes use of organized recreation sports as opposed to spontaneous. I don't have any particular language in mind, but that's the concept. Holding that concept for a minute, the other thing that I found that concerned me is, and there may be very good reasons for this, we're requiring with regard to the landscape maintenance, 2 performance bonds of the county. And I think there's likely to be some cost associated with that. And I'm just not sure if that's a wise expenditure of county monies at this particular point. Maybe in some instances it does make sense, and perhaps there is precedent for performance bonds in other public projects. But unless there is an answer that justifies it, I'd be in favor of dropping the bonding requirements. Those are my comments.
Commissioner Valencia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I've been watching this project for a long time. Like I said, Commissioner Oberdeck, this is years and years ago we were on this project and reviewing these things. In all these years, I've always been concerned because there's been a lot of accidents in that area where people fall off these cliffs and all. And one of the first things I did was when I looked at the staff report by Aaron, and he did a very good job, was there a fence on there? And I noticed that on page 4 they speak about the split rail fence. But I wonder it's only 5 foot high, and a split rail, basically there's 2 lines going horizontally and a few vertical posts. And I was wondering, people have a tendency to drink a lot on weekends down in that area. We know what happens, and there's nothing you can do about it. but I wonder if the fence is adequate enough to prevent people from, since they're going to be throwing frisbees and so on. Maybe you could expand on that.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Valencia, there are several factors that were considered when choosing the fence. Number one, this fence type is the fence type that's used in all the public parks out in Isla Vista, so it's common to the area. I believe the fence is basically to alert people of where the bluff top is. The fence would be placed 5 feet below the bluff top, and it would be meshed in between the 2 fence posts as shown by Ms. Vanetta. Also, in the project description, you'll notice that we put a provision in there to relocate the fence back as the bluff retreated. So I think the intent was to have a semi-permanent fence that could be relocated again and again as the bluff retreated, and not put up, a bulky, permanent style barrier to people. And as you can see on the landscape plan, the pathways are a good 10, 15, 20 feet away from the bluff edge, and in between the pathways and the fence itself, there would be, needed to waist-high shrubs and perennials planted there. So it wouldn't be a place that people would want to walk or hang out or possibly come too close to the fence.
Well, I thank you for that explanation, and thank Ms. Vanetta for that, showing me that it's mashed in the report. It doesn't get into that kind of detail, but that really, you'd have to be just extremely careless to go over that.
And the mesh size is too small to climb.
Yes.
And so that was deliberate. And it's also a dark color, so it doesn't block views and so forth.
That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Brooks.
Yes, thank you, Chair Blau. On the Sunday when I made my site visit, we drove our car under 2, I guess they were football games right out on the street. And so by the time we got to the park, I see a great need for a safer place to throw the football. But I do have some concerns. You couldn't play frisbee, or, well, I guess you could in the meadow part. I mean, that is not going to be an informal playing area then. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brooks, no, the intent of the meadow is just for it to be a seasonally changing open space that, adds to the inspiration of the park, not as a play area.
Mr. Chairman,
Go
can I
ahead.
also address that? I think, I apologize, I didn't think the hearing would start this early. I was going to give an overview of why the park is designed the way it is. I can try just by answering questions, but one of the reasons the park is zoned the way it is, that is with the native grasses on one end, is that portion of the site is conditioned upon sale as being a passive area, and so we weren't allowed to put active recreation on that whole area that is shown as the meadow.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown.
There are other bluff-top parks in Isla Vista, are there not, along Del Playa? And I don't think, have there ever been any problems with people falling over the edge, or there have in the county parks, from the county parks?
I don't know if it's the county, but
I think they're mostly is it from county parks?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Brown, I believe that people have fallen over the cliffs along public properties as well as
Both, okay.
private properties.
But those other parks don't have the fence, do they? Do they have fences? They do. So they just hop over them. So it won't prohibit people from.
I don't think
Certain
there's
number of
anything that
people-
can prohibit.
Yeah, if they're going to be stupid, they're going to be stupid.
it's better than the existing situation with no fence.
Yeah. Okay. My only comment is I would support Commissioner Cooney's 2 suggestions. One, that there be a prohibition against organized recreational activities, and that I would totally agree with him removing any bonding requirement. Why would the county bond? I mean, they would be the beneficiary of the bond and the payer of the bond. It's kind of silly.
I just have a question for you concerning organized activities. I think if there's a pickup game, that's an organized activity, and I don't think that your intent is
I think
limit that.
No, I
Is
think
that
what we're talking about is we don't want to have regular league play,
right,
scheduled
okay,
league
okay,
play.
that's the difference. Right.
You know,
Okay.
so.
So, Mr. Chair, it sounds like the commission's supportive of eliminating condition 15, which is the landscape bond requirement. And that you would like something added to the project description that indicates that you are not approving this park to be used for scheduled, organized activities.
Well, let me just ask you this question. I'm sorry that someone from Parks isn't here. If a group on one occasion wanted to go have an organized thing, whatever that activity is, they'd go to Parks, they make the request, I guess because that's in my neighborhood, there's a park, and they periodically do that. Is that going to be limited on a one-time, or is it the intention that this is a continuing scheduled event? I guess there's a difference, or maybe there's not a difference. I don't think it's to limit organized activities if it's like a pickup.
I think the way we put it was organized league play. I think that kind of defines it.
All right, so if that defines it better, all right.
Mr. Chair, if I could just suggest that it is important to have Parks input on this issue. I would suggest that we give Mr. Beltranena an opportunity to comment on our concern and to continue our final action to next week, sometime soon, just so we have the benefit of their thinking as to how to state that. But I agree with you totally. It's really the league play, the repetitive play, that preempts the park for any other use. And particularly during the longer daylight months of the year, that could go well into the evening, and does throughout our south coast. So I just would like to set this park aside as something special for the community, as opposed to organized league play. And I might add that with the proximity of UCSB and the use of their fields for league play, fraternity play is one league, but it's just one. There's the dorm has a league. All of these, there would be a tremendous temptation to sign it up and use it full time. So that's what I think we're trying to avoid.
Mr. Chair, if the commission wants input from Parks, and I think that's appropriate, we could just continue this for a week, and they could testify remotely if they don't want to attend our hearing in Santa Maria.
Great. Commissioner Brooks?
Yes, thank you, Chair Blau. As I made my site visit, we continued down Del Playa, and there was a grassy area, probably about 2 blocks down, and I could see in action, what we would hope that this park would look like, because it was very informal. There were small gatherings. There was a football being tossed, a dog or two running about. So I think if you have not seen that particular park in use, it might be a good idea, maybe, to visit that. It was informative for me.
Based on that, the chair will entertain a motion that we continue this to the meeting next Wednesday.
Mr. Chair,
Mr.
I would let the third district do that, but I would think maybe a conceptual motion so they know that we are in support of the project is just an additional comment by the project planner.
Mr. Chair, you can certainly do that if you'd like. Either way, we'll certainly
I think
let the Parks Department know.
I think it's a 5-0. We're in favor of it. We just got the other issues. So, Commissioner Cunha, I entertained the motion so you could move it if you'd like.